Next thing we can talk about is the NAR changes. I don't want to get into the weeds. I know everybody's always fighting each other and what's it do and how's it going to play out. Yeah. But there are some things we can do as buyers and agents in working with the NAR changes that will help us at least soften the changes, right? Yeah. And get us through these transactions.
I could summarize this pretty quick. I think the biggest thing is that it's pretty clear that I don't think they're going to be counted in interested party contributions.
That's a big difference.
Yeah. So just like the title policy today, the buyer or the seller could pay the title policy, okay? But if the seller pays it, it doesn't count towards the 3% cap on a conventional loan or the 6% cap on an FHA loan. So
let me say it a different way. So buyers that go in and negotiate and they have a max of 3% that they can use for their closing cost or rate buy down or whatever they want to use it for, that's their max per that loan's guidelines. If they have to also cover the cost of the title policy and the commission, if that comes up as part of the agreement, then that doesn't count against their 3%.
That's correct.
So that's where that subtle difference is. Now we can directly roll it into the loan, which really makes your adjustment to you personally a small amount monthly on the payment because it's a small adjustment there. And then it may adjust the down payment a little bit as well.
Correct. That was the concern. The other concern was there was, like a VA loan was set up so that the buyer couldn't pay the buyer's agent commission. All that's been taken care of. So at the end of the day, the lending world is really not too changed here.
They're ready.
They're ready. Yeah. So now we just got to see what happens as this, goes live in a couple of days.
It might be helpful to just look at a scenario. Mm-hmm. I do want to kind of look at that. I skipped past some of the other stuff, but I think looking at a scenario of a house that's $450,000,
yep,
and that's the original offer, and then we start on the left side with the seller paid commission, a more traditional transaction, the way it's been pretty much done since the 90s.
Right,
has been the seller would part of that sales price, and this is what people miss. Part of that sales price includes the cost of title, the seller agent commission, and the buyer agent commission. That's all included in that sales price that we're working from. So in general,
right,
okay, that's what appraisers are based on, right? All these things are kind of determined based on that. So where we have this adjustment is if the seller is neglected to pay or offer any type of compensation to the agent, the buyer agent, then it may have to be adjusted somewhere else.
Correct.
So you gave 4 scenarios to kind of explain that.
Yeah. So
first was the traditional one.
Yeah. And then the last one, kind of jumping around a little bit.
The other side.
Is the other side. The buyer says, hey, I'll just pay it. And hey, you think that's unusual, but in 2020 and 2021, that might have been the reality in certain transactions.
So it's a direct cost to your cash to close from $54,000 to $68,000, just a direct cost.
Yes.
Because they're paying the commission.
Correct.
And then their monthly payment doesn't change because they just paid the commission at closing. Right. Now, instead of paying the commission at closing, we've got financed into the loan.
Yeah. So let's say someone was going to bring, in this example, they were going to bring 10% down. Okay. You can back their down to 7% because you still meet the statutory minimum requirement on a conventional loan, which is 5%.
Very interesting.
Okay. And then you can use the 3% to pay the buyer's agent. And so the consumer, what's the net effect to the consumer?
Well, the same cash down, right?
Yeah.
Because you moved the 7 to the 10 or the 10 down to the 7.
Really close. I think it's a difference of about $55 or something like that. And then
call it a wash.
Yeah, call it a wash. And then
then it gets financed.
And then it gets financed and you add $80-something to your payment.
Yeah. To cover the entire buyer agent.
Because your loan amount went up a little bit because you're putting 3% less down. And so the consumer sitting there going, hey, I don't really have $13,000 to bring. I was going to put 10% down. Well, they can juggle.
Still put 10% down
to 7% down and 3% to the buyer's agent. Yeah. So that's an option as long as they meet that requirement. And then the last option or the third option on the chart here is if there's room in the appraised value, you could go and negotiate a higher sales price and have the seller pay it. Yeah. And basically you're financing it in that way.
Or the seller recognizes that their sales price they have listed on the MLS is also including the historical market, including the cost of the buyer agent. But I think the only real challenge with all of this is that appraisal. I like the second option because I think that gets everyone past, the cost, the initial bang to the buyer up front. It allows them to finance it. And then and it doesn't have to affect the appraisal because we're not going up in the price.
Right. Yeah. And that's, and so you're going to have certain clients that have the money or have the latitude to do it. And you're going to have certain clients that need the help, and they don't have the $13,000 in this example. and we're going to have to figure out a creative way to get that done, or, at least educate them early in the process. So to me, a big piece of this is at time of pre-approval, we're educating them on their options. We're not waiting until we find a house that the seller isn't contributing the 3% or, they've got a reduced commission on it. We've got that strategy figured out right up front.
So here's what I'd like to know. Mm-hmm. How is this? So you've got this. Would you suggest that the buyer actively looking to buy property have this conversation with you before they go and look at properties?
Yeah. If you send me over a buyer, I'm gonna educate them on this. When I send them estimates on what they're looking for and what they can afford, one of my estimates is going to be, hey, we might run into a 1 out of 10, 2 out of 20 situation where the seller's not willing to pay the buyer's agent commission, and here's the option I see based on your profile. Okay. And then I'm going to turn around and educate you as the buyer's agent on what that looks like, so that when you go out there what you're looking for.
Yep. How to write the contract and adjust it to accommodate
what our options are.
That's a real important component. And I think that a lot of lenders are not actively on that side. They just send out their pre-qual and say, go find the house. And then when we get the problem, come back to me.
Right.
Okay. So what happens is now we're looking at the same house at 450, and now the buyer is now confronted with a totally different program that they weren't expecting. Mm-hmm. And that conversation isn't going to work as well as if they weren't prepared for it up front, knowing that this could be a possibility.
Yeah. Well, they're not emotionally invested yet.
That's true.
As soon as they find a house, they're emotionally invested. So
that's a very good thing. Yeah.
Yeah. Sure. So let's get them educated, so when they say, hey, you say, hey, we're looking at a house that they're not paying the commission on. They say, that's fine. We've got a strategy. I'm just going to back off my down, So,
in your practice, what are you seeing out there so far? And it's kind of new because we've only eliminated the BAC, 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago?
Right.
Hasn't been very long.
Right.
Are you seeing any impact yet?
Not yet.
Not yet.
Yeah.
I think you're saying it right. And it's the way that I'm viewing it too. I think initially it's probably going to be 1 in 10. I mean, I think it's going to be a pretty low number of sellers that are discounting that or not offering. I have not run across one directly. We did work with a institutional company that buys and sells property, and they agreed up front that they were okay paying the full commission. And then we submitted an offer. We went over list price. They went through, ran their numbers, and they came back and said, we're okay with all terms, except for we're going to do 1.5 on the buyer agent commission. Right? They already agreed to it up front. Right. But now they have some leverage and strength here. So do we stick that extra amount over to the buyer or restructure the loan? And in that scenario, we work through it. Yeah. But that's important. Had we known this up front, we would have been better educated on how to address it.
Yeah. And in my mind, I don't know where it's going to go. You might be right and 100% right. But I sit there and go, hey, let's just figure out how we're going to execute against this. How we're going to educate against it. How we're going to get in front of it. So whatever scenario pops up, hey, they're willing to pay 1%, they're willing to pay 3%, they're willing to pay 1.5%. It doesn't really matter to us. We've already got a plan in place,
Not to beat everything down. Everyone's frustrated with the whole thing, but I feel like, in the end, what's happened is we've now pushed the buyer in the middle of the entire transaction and made it very complicated. The objective was to make it more transparent, but instead we've kind of blurred all the lines and made it very complicated for the buyer. You know what I'm saying? They didn't really achieve what we wanted to achieve. Now we just made everything really complicated.
Yeah.
You can't unring the bell.
Yeah.
So back in the 90s, you wouldn't have buyer agents. You would have sub agents. And the seller would work with a sub agent to bring a buyer, and they get a part of, the commission that way. It was sometime late 90s that they moved into this buyer agency saying, we really have defined roles that are important to separate the parties, and they represent their sides.
Right.
And we've been that way for 24 years. So
This whole change reminds me of the changes from 2008 a little bit. The mortgage industry had to evolve.
Oh yeah. Yeah. They thought it would crush them with the 3-day. No one would ever close them.
Yeah. And to me, the industry will figure it out, and
it will.
And the bottom line is we don't really have a choice. We got to go figure it out.
Yeah. Right now they're finding people that post any type of commission on any MLS.
Right.
So immediately delivering fines.
Right.
So they got teeth in it.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I appreciate it, Todd. Any other things you want to share before we?
I think that we're, to me, it's, and I'll just kind of summarize, it's about educating early. It's about not panicking the consumer that they have to bring all this extra money to closing. There's ways to work around that, and educating the realtor when they can't. So let's say I've got a buyer that's FHA putting 3.5% down, have enough money for the 3.5% and their closing costs, then I'll educate you right up front. And that way you can make that decision on,
here's where our weak spot is.
Yeah. And you could sit there and go, hey, we looked at this house, or they say, hey, I want to go look at this house. And you realize there's no commission paid. And then you say, hey, that doesn't fit our profile. No different than, hey, if you had a $500,000 approval and they said they want to go look at $1 million house, you're going to go, hey, that doesn't fit our profile. We need to stay away from that. You know?
Good point.
So
how do we find you?
The best way to find me is just, just call me, 817-291-1350. If you put my phone number in, or if you put Todd Nunes in, you'll find.
You're easy to find.
Yeah. I've been doing this too long not to be findable, so to speak, So
I can relate. If you put in my name, I have a unique name anyway.
Yeah.
Right? If you put in my name, I'm easy to find.
Yeah.
And feel free to continue to follow me on my YouTube channel. I'll continue to give you guys good information just like this. Thank you, Todd.
Yeah. Appreciate it. Yeah.